Welcome to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Kashman, here with my co-host, well, at first, not Chris McNulty. I'm here today in this intro with my dad, Howard Kashman. And a little later in the episode, Chris and I will talk with Christian Buckley, who is the leader and founder of Collab Talk, and he's also a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP. But back to that special guest for this intro. Dad, how are you doing?
Doing just great, Mark.
Where are you in from? What is it that brings you to this beautiful Pacific Northwest?
I came in from Colorado to see you and my wonderful grandchildren, especially that they were in a show at their high school, and it turned out to be wonderful.
Yeah, what did you think? My Fair Lady.
I was very impressed.
So for everybody in the audience, my son and daughter were both in My Fair Lady. My son was playing cello in the pit, and my daughter was playing Mrs. Pierce, of course, with Henry Higgins in the most exquisite British accent, which I will not try, but I will give you the opportunity if you'd like to try your English accent.
I'll pass on that.
So the topic today, Dad, is we're talking about external sharing, and I thought it would be kind of fun to hear about your past, and I will set the context because your past when you were working as a lawyer was pre-cloud. So most everything we talk on this show is about the Microsoft 365 cloud and this great innovation of all the things you can do there. But I want to hear from you when you were in your law days. First, how long ago was that? About how many years ago?
Well, I started in 1964, so it's been a fair number of years.
So pre-cloud, 1964.
Oh, well before the cloud, well before personal computers of any type.
Yeah. And then as you retired and moved away from law, or at least from a day-to-day law, still no cloud. That was when?
I pretty much went into semi-retirement in the mid-90s. And moved from my office in Tucson, where I'd been practicing my whole career, to Colorado.
So if with this context, pre-cloud, really almost pre-computing, there was still the notion of working with external people. And in the law profession, I thought it would be fun to hear the most common types of people that you were working with that weren't a part of your firm or weren't directly responsible, year on year, but special people that you worked with. How would you describe when you worked with external users in the law profession?
Depending on the type of case I might be involved in, there were consultants, experts, antagonistic witnesses to deal with, research that had to be done, both legal research, looking for case authorities, statutory authority, and so on, but also to be able to go into historic documents that an expert may have had occasion to write in other cases. And finding an expert having said something inconsistent years before than he's now saying in the case that I'm involved in, very helpful. To be able to do that with some of these modern technologies is unbelievable to me.
So let's break that apart a little bit. I imagine pre-cloud, it doesn't mean that work stopped and you didn't not work with people who didn't, directly weren't a part of your firm. But what was that like? Were there a lot of documents that were submitted to you, I'm guessing on paper? How were those stored and what were some of the processes behind doing that research?
Well, let's start with my early years doing primarily criminal work. And police reports, lab reports, statements taken by the police authorities, all were paper documents. There was no such thing as being able to pull it up on a screen and read the transcripts, for example. Even in the early days, we had court reporters who gave us word for word of what a witness had said. But those documents might be hundreds of pages for an hour's worth of a deposition, for example.
So if we then fast forward into today's, a lot of our offerings are intended, one of the things that we talked about on a recent roadmap was how you could request files from other people and they could submit proposals, or in your line of work, that might have been a deposition or a key witness's statement. Now imagine all of that is at your fingertips. It's in the right location. It's searchable. Obviously, you can leverage a lot of it by just copy-pasting things and putting it into a new document or a new plan that you're putting together to state your case. But with that context of now working in the cloud with some of these same external users, what type of time-saving would you get? And what other things besides doing research and searching for the right thing would you transition naturally to?
Well, I should say the early use of the type of technology you're asking about was with legal research. I can't imagine the amount of time that I used to spend in libraries searching out different cases from different sources. There was a decennial digest, for example, that covered 10 years' worth of cases, of head notes of cases. And now being able to punch a key and switch from reading one case to a citation from another case, things like that. To be able to do that with documents is really sensational when you're talking about planning for trial, for example. In a given case, there may be hundreds of pages of reports, testimony, what have you. And to have a computer sitting in front of you at the conference, at the table, the plaintiff's or defense table, and be able to put in a key word and bring up everything you want. Likewise, having the ability to outline documents and then from the outline hit a button and you're all of a sudden in the document.
And that effectively could be the culmination of work across multiple people across the team, not all of which who are always, directly as a part of your firm.
Oh, certainly. You're talking about major New York-sized firms. My partner and I each had a paralegal, we each had a secretary, and we were it. So if we needed assistance, we were looking at from investigators, from experts, especially in personal injury cases where we had hired a nurse to review medical records and basically interpret reports that were in handwriting, not handwriting, but in style of doctor's writing to understand what they were doing.
I've seen your signature as well. I thought that maybe you could have been a doctor based on your signature. Well, thank you for sharing, obviously, a little world into what was external sharing like pre-cloud and sometimes pre-computing, but level setting into what it might be like today. But I also have to thank you for coming and visiting because Sophie and Eli absolutely loved the support and the cheering that you gave during the 2 performances of My Fair Lady.
Well, I certainly am delighted to have done that. But I would like to add one thing.
Okay.
It's been really quite fulfilling to spend time with you and to see the education that you've established in this field. Having spent my life starting with before computers existed and now hearing you interview people in such technical terms and seeing how you have developed a level of expertise that this company sends you around the world to discuss is really wonderful.
Well, thank you. Well, obviously I learned from the best, and if I can translate what you did for law for what I'm trying to do for tech, I'll take that as the highest form of compliment.
You bet.
So now you all have met my dad, and hopefully get another little window into what makes Mark tick. Certainly it was a pleasure to have him here in the studio, and with that little context of what his work might have been like in the cloud, but really that pervasive nature that everybody at some point works externally, and it shouldn't be a blocker, but it should always be under your control for the purposes that you need. So in a moment, we're going to hear and talk with Christian Buckley. This is a conversation that Chris and I had with Christian while he was here in Seattle. And we talked all about external sharing across simple nature, just sharing a file, all the way up through establishing a full extranet, working with multiple clients. And really, he has a bunch of deep insights. Christian, certainly has been around for a while. He knows the Microsoft technology, but what he really knows is what customers need and how to guide them in the best ways, especially that guidance when it comes to externally exposing some of your content and making sure to do it in a safe and secure way. Before we get into the conversation with Christian, I want to play a few clips from a session from Ignite just a couple of weeks ago, and this particular session was titled External File Sharing in Microsoft 365 with Rafael Lopez Urrutia and Stephen Rice, and they provided a look at both what's available today and, of course, a window into what's coming, but all in that framing of when you share externally from Microsoft 365, whether it's a site, a document, and all of the things that you can choose to do and not to do when you take advantage of working externally. There's a couple of clips that talk around the innovation that's coming, and there's a couple of clips around just that sharing notion and how it is that they design and plan to keep it so that you can be productive with people outside of your company, but are secure and governed in a way that you can report, audit, and of course, keep your data safe. So let's hear a series of clips from Raphael and Stephen and their talk from Ignite 2019 External File Sharing in Microsoft 365.
The main takeaway that I want you to get from this session is that OneDrive makes external sharing easy and secure across Microsoft 365. And so in this overview section, we're going to go over what I hope are relatable scenarios and show how OneDrive makes it easy and secure to accomplish them. Because whether you're working out of SharePoint or out of the Office apps, or if you really continue to be a desktop user and you use tools like File Explorer, or maybe you use Finder, then you get still a consistent sharing experience across Microsoft 365. And this year, we're excited to be announcing integration with Outlook and with Microsoft Teams. And so no matter where or how you work, you're able to share securely in the same way across web, desktop, phones, tablets with the same experience and all of the same capabilities.
Now let's look at what's new for admins. We've rolled out the ability to give admins, site administrators, see what files have been shared from their site. They run the report and it exports a CSV file that contains a row for every unique file, user, link, and resource. So every unique permission on the site shows up in that report. And it has lots of amazing metadata in there, like the type of the user, what permission they have, what link they have, and so on, which lets you do cool and detailed reporting on top of it. Now, my favorite way, of course, is to take this data and import it into Power BI. You can make some really cool graphs there. But of course, because it's a CSV file, you can do whatever works for you. If you want to build your own tool to process that data, you can do it too. And I actually got the news, I think literally yesterday, that this is now 100% available in production. So you can go home, try it out. It's super exciting to see.
So in this next clip, you're going to hear from Jeff McDowell and Sesha Mani from their security and compliance session, where they focused a little bit from an IT perspective on external sharing and some of the new innovations to make it a lot easier to control and manage external users.
How many of you have to deal with external sharing and bringing in partners to your corporate data? Yeah? It's a very common scenario. The biggest worry now is the moment I share a document or a site with an external user, until I remember to revoke that access and so on, the person has access forever, right? That is the biggest concern that we have heard repeatedly from many of you. Well, we are happy to announce that we have a new feature called automatic expiration of external user access. Meaning, sure, yes, you can configure a specific time period, let's say 60 days for you at the tenant level, so that when the external user, first day he comes in, start accessing your file or the site, he has 60 days. Until that point, the access will automatically get revoked from the service. Okay?
So I know Sesha set up a 60-day expiration for external users. As the site admin, I can go over to site permissions, and I have this extra tab here that says guest expiration. And if I click on manage, I can see all of the external users that have access to my site, and if I pick one of them, I have the option to either extend their access for the expiration duration again, or I can revoke and remove access from them immediately, and they'll immediately lose access to all the resources. So I can have total control and visibility into who has access to this site, and reaffirm that they still need access, or get rid of them if I know that they need to go as the site owner. Pretty good.
Pretty good.
So there you heard Jeff McDowell and Sesha Mani showcasing all that value of how IT can further protect content, or at least control and report off of what end users have done, and of course, take action when needed. Coming up next is our discussion with Christian Buckley, founder and CEO of Collab Talk, Microsoft Regional Director and MVP. Stay tuned.
So welcome back to the Intrazone. Today, we're sitting down with Christian Buckley. Christian is the founder and CEO of Collab Talk LLC. He's a Microsoft Regional Director. He's an MVP. He is a friend of the program and a great friend to this community for over a decade. So welcome, Christian.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we're talking a lot about things that you've done throughout your many roles in the community to share your knowledge and insights. See what I'm doing there? To be able to bring it to sharing. We really want to sit down and get an insight, about some of the things that you've been sharing, and Mark, I know as well, about sharing.
I'll take one step back and just say it's been a pleasure being a friend and a fan. The fan side it's I think one of my most commonly used hashtags in my whole Twitter feed is hashtag Collab Talk, because I've joined a lot of your Collab Talks.
For the 2% of our vast user audience that is unfamiliar with it, what is Collab Talk and how can they participate?
Yeah, so Collab Talk, besides, so it's my company, but it's one of those things where I was thinking about as a marketer, as starting, moving from a CMO for an ISV, so a chief marketing officer for an independent software vendor.
Acronym watch.
Sorry.
Acronym watch.
No. So I, obviously wanted to go and create a brand for my standalone company. I'm the principal, and I work with various people and vendors, and I hire grad students for research projects and things. I wanted to go with a brand that was familiar. Collab Talk was something that I actually started. I was the chief evangelist for an ISV that is no more, a company called Exceller. Everybody remembers Exceller. If you probably were, if you're in the SharePoint space, then you were called repeatedly, probably daily.
Green flashing things.
Yes, green flashy things at events. But it was January of 2012 was the first time. For a long time, all that time, I wanted to get out of the echo chamber around certain important discussion topics. And so I was always friends with direct competitors, people at these different companies. So I had friends at Metalogix and MetaVis and AvePoint and Quest and kind of all these different folks. And so I would invite all of these different people and said, hey, here's this topic I want to discuss. Let's do a tweet jam on this topic. And so I would post the questions, and I've run those monthly, almost monthly. I've only missed a handful since January of 2012. So that's the Collab Talk hashtag. And funny enough, I never looked at it until December of 2016, getting ready January 1st of 2017 to spin up my own company. I never looked to see whether the domain was actually available, and it was. So I went and grabbed it. I have every variation. Don't go looking.
External sharing from a customer perspective, they're asking themselves the questions, do we allow it? If not, why? And you're meeting with them to obviously, hopefully, talk them off the cliff. But what are you hearing? Is this perception versus reality, or is there more to it they have the capability? If they're in Office 365, what goes from there?
So again, it depends on what they're trying to do. It's difficult to go and have it. People will come in and ask a very specific question, and then my natural response is, well, what are you trying to do? Because is the answer that you're asking a technical, is this feasible or not? It's like, yes, you can do that. Is it the right thing for you to do? I don't know. What are you trying to do? What's great to see is that there is now. The out-of-box capability is, I think I made this point in our session, that what you don't want to do is in an organization is have people who have a valid need to go and collaborate externally and then not allow them to do that, or make them jump through all these hoops and make it very complicated where all that they need to do is securely, with governance, with oversight, be able to share out one or two pieces of content, collaborate with different partners and customers or whatever it is. And if you're making it overly restrictive, like, oh, we've not launched our formal extranet around this, like, do you need that? Can't I just simply go and share it out? I can use my personal OneDrive, or I can use my the work account for this, whatever that is, so that you have insight into who's sharing what and can control that. This is this trusted partner, let's give them external access in.
So when you're talking to, the customers that we encounter in the community, I'm going to oversimplify the sharing decision. Someone can choose to either share a file or document, or they can share a container. How do you help someone sift out when should you share out here's the team, here's the site, and we have content in here to work on versus here's the file we need to work on? Like, what kind of you think steers an organization toward the container model, and what would steer someone toward the file model?
Well, again, is the intent, the longer term goal of what you're trying to do. If I'm working with a vendor or a client on a specific deliverable, a Word doc, a PowerPoint, whatever that is, then it's just as simple as sharing that one file. I think a lot of those graduate up into the container discussion, where it could be a folder in a OneDrive that's a little container, or it could be, you know what, we need to have something more full-blown. We need to be able to track the conversations. We need to share videos around this, a bunch of other artifacts. The output of that interaction over the next 6 months might be a single deliverable, but it could take, 30 different artifacts to get to that point. Well, it's going to be a lot of effort to manage and juggle all those things in a OneDrive container. You might want to have an externally available, SharePoint library. You might want to have an entire team with external access. I use the example in the presentation. I talked about Yammer as well as being that, or it may be that we're going to be doing this. This is this partner, but we're going to do this on a regular basis with other partners. Let's go build a formal extranet.
Before we got into that, sort of the specifics that are part of the answer to your question, we put the framing around structured versus unstructured. There may be a point in time where I just need to do X, and you can kind of do that. But anytime you get the scale of content, people, or the duration of a project, whether it's they need more apps or they just need more for a longer period of time, then you get into easily the container or the more apps perspective. And, once you're in, then there isn't really the act of sharing anymore. They just know where to go and they can get what they need.
So, Mark, you've been working in this space for a while. Based on what you've heard, what are some of the misconceptions about why organizations might be afraid of sharing or might shut it off versus the reality of how that works?
The big one, which we may have even done as an FAQ in a previous episode, but it's very applicable here, is when I turn on external sharing, just as a motion that IT can then do. Does that mean everything that I have in my tenant is now available to not everybody in the world, but easier? Is it less secure because I've enabled external sharing? And we really like to then walk them through. When you turn on external sharing, it actually means nothing is externally shared. You're just starting to then make a decision. Do I want to make this site externally available versus the 100 sites that are going to be always internal and private only? So that's one misperception. The other is when I start sharing, can other people share to other people? And there are ways where you can make that happen because that might be the right intent. I want to go to a number of different vendors, and sometimes they have multiple people from that vendor that haven't been named, but they start to hand it around. I can enable that to be shared with a domain versus an individual. Or I can lock it down and go more the Azure Active Directory B2B route, where I've already named who I can share with and I control it at that level. The bigger question behind that is, how do I control this? And really the question behind that is, can I control it? And the big answer is yes, it's all governable. You choose who has the power to share externally. You also have the power to turn it off whenever you think it might be getting out of control.
I think another one, and I've heard this consistently, is organizations get afraid that because I can have the option to generate a link, that anyone with the link anonymously could open up the file. They think that they're also conferring license rights. They're afraid someone's going to take a link to a document, post it publicly, and they'll be on the hook for 10,000 new licenses for Office 365. Even though, from Microsoft's perspective, yes, we are a revenue-focused company, but not that focused. That's not how we make money, and we don't charge for this.
Well, at the onset of our session, one of the big things that we just cleared the deck on is when you share externally, you've already paid for that. There is no additional external user license.
Historically, though, that's a change. It used to be able to enable, that you had that deployment. You had the Office apps. There was a server installation of support those things. Right. So you had that. So historically, but of course, most people don't know that history was there.
We used to do when I was in the channel. We used to do consulting around that and it would usually come down to how many external users do you need, and when that was the licensing model, if it was the break point in most cases was around 300 to 500. If you have more than that, get the unlimited external license. If you have less than that, buy them individually. But we're going back 12 years.
Yeah, look, I was never a fan of that as a scaling mechanism, a licensing scheme for any vendor, any OEM around that, is when you penalize people for encouraging, you discourage them from using the platform, that's a bad model to build around that scaling. Charge them more for storage, charge them more for new capabilities, for support, for all those things, but not on making the application a more integral part of the way that you work. You don't want to discourage that. You want to make it easier for people to use that technology.
So let's dive into the scenarios. And we've got kind of 3 that we used as our outline, which we thought, covered a pretty broad spectrum of what people do when they think about sharing externally at different levels. The first one is pretty straightforward. We've kind of talked about it a little bit. Just the notion of sharing a document. Is that something that you see resistance to if people are thinking, do I or do I not share externally in the ways that Microsoft enables me to?
No. That's pretty easy. The only question that comes out of that, and we'll hear this again, is like people say, well, I want to be able to, as IT, I want to have oversight of what was shared by whom. It's like, can I see that? Yes, you can. If that weren't there, then I'd say that there are valid concerns for disabling that capability. But you have that insight, you have that data, and so there should be no fear in allowing people to go and share a single item.
And I'm going to just tack on a plug for Microsoft and a lot of the work that we're doing in this space. When I share from X, whether that's OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, Outlook, from the desktop, Mac, PC, that notion of sharing actually brings up a unified sharing experience. Once you learn it once, even on a mobile device, you're going to get the same experience, the same level of choice of how you share. Can they, have permissions to edit? Is this going to expire? Do I want to block download? Those types of capabilities. No matter where you share from, it's now a consistent sharing experience.
A lot of praise for Microsoft. It kind of came out of the blue like a year and a half, 2 years ago, that they're investing specifically in standardizing, unifying the sharing experience across the various application. And as I said during the session, like that was something that I specifically complained about So I wasn't aware that, hey, it was on the list of things to go and tackle.
So then moving into sort of the next level up, and you can kind of challenge us if I frame it wrong here, but the next obvious step is inviting guests into Microsoft Teams that have, of course, a lot of things behind that. A lot of the components that come with that: shared calendar, shared inbox, shared document library, and other apps that come along with that. Do you see resistance there, or how do you pitch that, specifically amongst what people are trying to accomplish?
Yeah, you have a longer duration, you have the multiple artifacts in there. Is there some resistance? I think that's where you get a lot of those questions of, okay, what do I, as the company that owns the space, what licenses am I responsible for? What do I have to actually go and manage? And I think even then, the out-of-the-box experiences, while there's limited capability for those guests, one of the complaints I have, I'm part of I'm a guest within dozens of Teams environments, and it's very limited what a guest can go in and do. And so some of my clients then go and actually give me a corporate email and login so I can be a full-fledged member of that and do what needs to be done in that environment. So there's less resistance. I think that there's still some education that needs to be done around what you get, what you don't get. That's why I think Teams is great. I still advocate for using Yammer in that scenario as well. It's a fantastic kind of, quick start intranet solution.
I actually think it's one of the nice criteria. You just laid out that you're a member of a number of different teams from different companies, and some want a little more from you. So they enable you in a way that you can, still on the same platform, still the same stack, still the same Microsoft Teams eventually, but maybe plus. But it is just that. It's sort of back to your statement, you got to still, what are you trying to accomplish? There's always a way to accomplish it. What are you trying to accomplish?
Right. So having that where it's a little more activity time based, so it's longer. It's not just one artifact over that, and it could be there's other automation, other tools, functionality that you want to add. Again, can be enabled through Teams and through Yammer, through a solution like that.
Okay, I'd like to kind of broaden the dialogue. If there's an evolution, organizations eventually get to a point where they are not just talking about sharing a file or sharing guest membership, but they're talking about sharing with a capital S. We want to establish an extranet presence because we want to have rules and policies around in the aggregate. Here is how we at Contoso share files with external vendors, with our partners at Fabricam, with the legion of graduate students at Collab Talk. Like, how does that extranet scenario play out in most organizations, and what are some of the pitfalls?
Well, so I think that's the traditional view of the extranet. So what you're talking about. So it's you're actually establishing something where they're so I kind of mentioned with the other, you could do a little bit of some of the automation, some of the business process management, the things like that, where you want to automate the provisioning process. So you want something that is, some scenarios are, depending on across multiple industries, you're working with, you could be hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of customers or dozens or hundreds of partners. And each one of those, you might want to have a very similar experience and the capability that's allowed, but you want to keep each of the partners, separate, and the content, the conversations, the things around that. And then managing that, maybe you have a single IT team, and so it's all centralized, and so that's a full-time job, just managing those aspects. I mean, I've done it in different organizations. When I was at Microsoft, I managed dozens of SharePoint environments. We had extranet partner environments. I had a dedicated permissions person. That's all he did. That was his full-time job, and he was a busy guy. That was a while back, but. That's where you start to get into various options where I think there's more that you can do to automate. So automate the provisioning of that, automate the authentication, the identity side of that as people come in, they kind of self-service, they authenticate, they sign in as somebody who owns those environments. If you have the ability to go in and say, this domain, so this set of users or this specific user no longer has access, you could automate the expiration of that activity, and then it all be done so you're not manually having to go in there and manage Azure AD on that behalf. And so that's where you have like the Azure AD B2B, you have other third-party solutions that allow you to go in and build very customized, specific solutions. And most of that, it's not about the functionality of what you do. You're creating a container, you're having conversations, you're sharing files, there's data that's being stored and shared within that. But it's about management, it's about, could be about automation within that. Like if I want to have, in fact, somebody that came to the end of the session was asking, well, how would I actually go do this with Teams or if I built an extranet? I said, well, either one of those scenarios, you could still have a single SharePoint environment or a communication site, and then make that communication site part of every one of the templates, whether you go build it in. So every one of your partners, if they're coming in to any one of their extranet instances, they see that same centralized thing, but all of the conversations, all of the collaboration that happens is segmented to them.
I will say one thing too about the where he actually started that question was for us, in kind of this dangerous zone. He was going to build a single site collection with a ton of subsites with disparate permissions per each.
We told him no. We slapped his hand. Yeah.
Well, but interesting enough, once he heard the approach that we would propose, and certainly you went a little bit deeper, he didn't see it as too much overhead. I think that was where he was first worried, like, well, what if I did all that? It's going to be hard to manage. And the reality was it wasn't, and it was better.
Should I say, too, that I asked him, I said, how many are you talking about? And he says, probably like 50 to 80. I'm like, I know it sounds like a lot to you. That's not much. That's like, but I was like, I still understand that. I said, I have people that are, talking about thousands of instances of that. And And there are still, even then, there are solutions, there are reports, there's more and more coming out, this expansion of PowerShell to be able to go and manage that more and more through the admin console, the admin experiences.
We focus a lot in this part of the discussion about the organizational policy, right? We're going to use tooling to say, you can generate external links, but they have to be persisted for 30 days, or they can only be out of these containers, and we don't want them out. You can't share the finance site, all those kinds of top-level rules about how people work together. I just would be curious to get your thinking on the other side of sharing at scale, because we're focusing sort of on the launch, right? I am a sharer. I am going to send things to you to work on. But there's the very real, does someone know what to do when they get those links, to click on it? And then over time, you talk a little bit about organizations that are successful and people who are successful and some of the capabilities that are there to help you as the collaborated with manage all of the content that gets sent your way.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I think ultimately I'm, look, can I just go and build, there's again, it's a Microsoft product. It's a internally kind of in some ways competing, the Power Apps portal idea. Can I go build from scratch a website that does everything that I want and need and collaborate and have it as an extranet? Yeah, sure. But I look at that and I say, yeah, but everything, you're just trying to recreate the creation of SharePoint and of Teams, and built into those things has the administration, has the reporting capability, has all of the other functionality that I need. I don't know, that doesn't entirely answer what you say, but you have then built into that a lot of the back end, the visibility. I mean, we had a couple questions around the transparency of the actions. If I want to be able to see across all of those things, so I said, look, is the tenant admin for all those things all underneath the banner of your Office 365? You'll be able to go and build reports and pull all the data, have visibility into all those different things.
Yeah, where I was going with the question is also on the other side of it. Just a reminder that the best practice is, if you're receiving lots of links, is there's tooling that sits inside OneDrive or inside the mobile client that says shared with me. There's a feature that's been released recently to the Office clients that said where I can, when I go to the backstage view, that file tab that sits inside Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc., I can not just look for my favorites and my recents, but I can also say shared to me. Because if someone has sent me a link in email or in Teams or generated it and pointed it my way, I can look at those because those are relatively hot. And the other thing that I find is that the ability that I can go into my mobile clients and see what have I shared to other people, because odds are, if Mark cares about a document, I may wind up sharing it to Dan or to you or to Ankita or someone else.
Yeah, I was going to pivot on there's recent, there's shared with me, shared by me, and at the document level, the files level, that is super helpful, and it actually shows up in a lot of places. Christian had mentioned that he gets pulled into a lot of Teams experiences across multiple companies, and it's good to know that there is the Teams experience of how to switch the different contexts. So I work with people at Microsoft. There's a lot of Teams I join there, but then specifically to this conference, they started up a nice Teams experience for all speakers, and I just switched over, and the product gives it this sort of reminder that I can switch context and go and reach out to either the event team or the other speakers there, versus maybe I was invited by an important customer, we're working with them long term, and I can go and switch the context there. But to your question, I think I can see all the Teams instances from the different companies that I'm pulled into. Mm-hmm. Same with Yammer. If I had created a number of external Yammer groups, I can switch that context. I see the full list. I can actually see notifications, and I can be pulled back to them.
But all the data is there. I mean, you could, if you wanted to go and build specific views and things into, you could also go and customize that and say, look, I want to show me not just the most recently shared with me, but prioritize them by due dates for those things. So there's all sorts of things that you go in there and part of that customized experience as well.
I also would suggest one of the things that we've been continually refining, and it's I think a underlooked tool as people are forging extranets, both for the organizational experience and for the end user experience, is the highlighted content web part. because in addition to stuff that's being able to run queries and pull out specific content, we're increasingly putting in, here's what makes the most sense for you. Here's what you've been working with recently and frequently. Here's what's been shared to you. And it's a tool that you can use to kind of get closer to what you were talking about not going all the way back to bare metal and build up a complete website experience, but use the extranet, but enrich it with those no-code add-ins that I can use to just drop into the homepage of the site and then pin it as a channel tab, and then people can just be driven to that information from the get-go.
Let's get your mind share and just wrap up. Final thoughts you would share with a customer either when you first meet them or after that first meeting. One thing, don't forget this about external sharing.
It goes back to that fundamental question of, what are you trying to accomplish? Don't rush towards a solution without having a really an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish there. There could be multiple ways of accomplishing that, and then figure out the one that is the best fit for your need and for the culture of collaboration in your organization.
True or false? Is there one tool that rules them all, or is it still dependent on what you're trying to accomplish?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is like, well, there's the things that I favor because of the way that I collaborate. But no, there's not one way. There's actually, even inside of a workload like SharePoint, there are many times multiple ways of accomplishing a task.
Well, Christian, we want to thank you for all the work you do, Collab Talks and beyond, obviously here, giving us time to chat with you about external sharing. We hope you great wonders and success in where you go next, but thanks for your time today.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for coming in.
It's always great to hear from one of our Microsoft MVPs, and certainly with Christian, who's been around for quite some time, working with customers across a lot of different scenarios. Specifically around extranets, they always get a little bit tricky, and of course there's always that perception, is my content safe, even if I'm working with people outside of my company? And I hope you heard a lot of insights from Christian that the answer is yes. Yes with governance, yes with planning, and always great to know the things that you can do in SharePoint in Microsoft 365. So don't go away. Coming up next, important events near and far. So if you're asking yourself, I missed Ignite, or I can't travel for a while, maybe I should find something that's a little bit more regional. We want to make sure you know about all the opportunities that are coming your way. There's 2 events that have multiple events behind them that we want to walk through. One of them we always talk about is SharePoint Saturdays. They're free. They're always coming up. There's a lot of cities that will be coming up soon. If you go to spsevents.org, you can find all the SharePoint Saturdays that are coming up near you. And remember, they're free, and guess what? They're free. The first one that I want to mention is SharePoint Saturday Oslo, December 7th. This one has Jeff Teeper and Omar Shaheen as special guests. Jeff Teeper is a corporate vice president on SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office. And Omar is a director of program management for OneDrive and SharePoint. They're going to be sharing the keynote, sharing a lot of great information there in Oslo. Then on December 14th, there are 2 SharePoint Saturdays, SharePoint Saturday Charlotte and SharePoint Saturday Istanbul. If any of those 3 are near or even far, they're always worth going to, with great speakers, great content, and always great to network with people who are interested in some of the things that you are, specifically around SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, Stream, and everything that makes teamwork and engagement come alive. So join in a SharePoint Saturday near you. It is always a good thing. Next on the event calendar, and these are ongoing, is Ignite the Tour. If you are unable to attend Ignite in Orlando, now is your chance to reap all the benefits of Ignite brought to a city near you, bringing all of the same technical training led by Microsoft experts and MVPs and people that are in your own community. If you go to the Microsoft Ignite the Tour site, you can find a city that's near you. There will be links to all the sessions that they offer. Specifically in December, beyond the publication of this episode, the 3 cities that will round out the end of 2019 are going to be Tokyo, Beijing, and Sao Paulo. And specifically, if you're interested in SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, and Stream sessions, look for the coded sessions SOIs 10, 20, 30, and 40. Those will be all the sessions if you want to dive and learn more about the technology that we most commonly talk about on the Intrazone. The last event, December 9th through the 13th, is SharePoint Fest Chicago. The Microsoft keynote is with Naomi Moneypenny, who is the Director of Content Services and Insights, and, of course, a guest on the Intrazone recently to talk about Project Cortex. Of course, there are going to be sessions by Microsoft speakers and MVP speakers. It's a 3-day conference with 2 additional workshop days, with a total of about 130 plus sessions, 25 workshops, and of course, like any other great event, good networking opportunities. You can go to their main site, sharepointfest.com/Chicago, and follow them on Twitter @SharePointFest. Thank you to our guest, Christian Buckley, and my dad, Howard Kashman. Check out our show page for links to all of what was discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/The Intrazone. And if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and listen to a new show. We encourage you to reach out with your questions or feedback for the SharePoint engineering and product teams. You can email us at theintrazone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000. Tell all your friends and colleagues about the show. Share the SharePoint love. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you like the show, write a review. We always love to hear what you have to say, and of course, we thank you for sharing with others. Thanks again for listening. We are your hosts, Mark Kashman, Howard Kashman, and Chris McNulty. Thanks for listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet and Extranet.